Okay. So, welcome everybody to a very busy Parish Council meeting. My name is Chris Jones. I foolishly agreed to be the Deputy Chairman, and for some strange reason, Simon's decided that this is the first time he's not going to actually turn up and do the proper job himself. So, unfortunately, you've got me in full training mode trying to make this meeting happen. The agenda is pretty busy in terms of what we've got to cover and the range of things we've got to cover. So, on advice from Amanda, we're going to try and keep it fairly sharp and fairly crisp. And to that end, we'll crack on with agenda item number 1. So I've already done, hopefully, the welcome bit, and everyone feels delighted to be here. We have to note a few things that have been relevant to the parish. We wanted to note in our minutes that our thanks to Father Graham, who's this will be the last council meeting before Father Graham retires. Hopefully we'll see him all in full voice at the Harrison Square in a couple of weeks' time. But formally, this is our opportunity to recognise what he's done for the parish. And as it says here, we wish him a long and peaceful retirement. So that's sufficient. Excellent. Secondly, record our thanks to Cooper Vision and BP, who've both been very generous in welcoming us to go and visit their facilities. It's been very helpful for us to understand a bit more about what they are up to. And finally, to thank Hamble Aerostructures for offering their social facilities for us to undertake some meetings that we're planning in January, which will all become clearer when we get into the whole issue of CEMEX, and we're grateful for that. Apologies for absence. We have our erstwhile chairman, who did get around to apologising apparently, and Michelle's.
She has used poorly, and also Councillor Cross is absent.
And Malcolm's and I think at that point we're going to crash on to point number 2, which is reviewing and approving the minutes of the last meeting.
Dispensation, sorry.
Oh, right. So dispensations, sorry. We have some dispensations.
I did have a CEMEX objection letter from the previous session. I had a dispensation for.
Well, I have a dispensation for CEMEX as well, and if there's anything which I can't see regarding the dinghy park.
Fees and charges.
Yes.
So.
Any interest for dispensation? Okay, thank you. Right, in that case, let's leap on to approving the minutes from the last meeting. So I think there's some points to raise, aren't there?
I'll just propose, and there's 3 just minor typing things there, which are not factual or anything like that. So
they have been amended.
Yeah,
Okay.
And second, Tony? Yes, second, yeah. And everyone in favour? I think we're all happy with that. So that brings us to the public participation. So for anyone who's not had the pleasure of doing one of these meetings before, this is the one, normally this is the only section where people from the public are invited to speak, and thereafter people are just invited to stay and listen. However, we have our item number 4, which Emily's going to lead us all through, coming next. So just in case, is anyone going to need to say anything from the public that's not? Okay, public participation done, and we're well ahead of schedule, and we're on to item 4 already. So, by the way of context, I think that this is obviously the biggest issue that's going on in the parish at the moment. Emma and all the guys are doing massive amount of work. From a council side of things, we're now kicking up into gear. We've got our weekly coordination group that's active, and what we need to do is to make sure that what we're addressing in that exercise actually picks up on all of the points. Our agenda is different because we have to make sure we cover all possibilities and all outcomes and every concern. But obviously, it's really important that we understand what the other voices in the village are. So I think what we're here, number one, Emma, is to communicate across the council everything that you've got going on. And then if we can wrap at the end of that somehow to try and get a picture about what the council, what would you like from the council?
Yeah, perfect. So I have written something to try and keep myself to script, as it were. I was aware at the last meeting that we hadn't really explained to you guys what we were all about and what we were actually doing, and that we weren't just waving flags and banners, that we were actually doing some research. So I put together that sheet of paper just so that I don't waste your time now going through history of how we got together. But that's a bit of a brief on where we're coming from and what our ethos was. But we're all residents from the village. We either live here or we've got a strong family history or connection to Hamble.
Sorry, Emma. There was one critical thing I had to mention before we got started. This is all being recorded.
That's fine.
It's not being streamed anywhere, but it is being recorded, and we're hoping that we will be able to use that recording to share it with everyone in the village. So just before anyone jumps up, sorry, apologies, I shouldn't have done that before.
No, that's fine. We were hoping you were recording it because then, we can listen to it again. So our collective ethos is that we're trying to work towards a good outcome for the village regarding the airfield. And we had quite a lot of contention when we set up because there was lots of different opinions and agendas on what people actually wanted. So we've narrowed it down. We've all agreed on a sort of terms of reference and a consent form amongst ourselves, but we've pledged to respect and confidentiality to each other. So we're taking it seriously. One of the things we want from you is to understand the timing of the presentation of the information. So our plan so far has been firstly to show up flaws in the process, to delay or find a reason to delete the concept of the quarry. We focused individually on areas. I'm going to ask each of these guys in a minute to stand up and go through their area in more detail. Our focus has been traffic, water management, health. And we've also looked at case studies of other quarries around the country, and we've contacted them for some of their specialists to see if we can use them or what we can learn from them. We believe the airfield is unlikely to stay as it is, so we've wanted to be fair and reasonable to the landowner by offering an alternative solution as well to create some revenue. Bearing in mind they stand to make about 100 billion on housing, they're not going to go quietly just leaving it. So that's where Alistair has already presented the solar idea. So we had, Rob has done some research with the universities on how you would net zero the village using the airfield, and he's got some interesting information with that. So we also wanted to engage the community and make sure they're aware of the situation. So seeking residents' expertise to help, because we're also aware that that's quite hard to find. But also making sure that everybody is aware of what's going on. And to encourage residents to respond when we need them to respond, not to respond early with uneducated responses. So we aim now, I looked at your comms thing on your agenda, and that is brilliant. So we haven't actually sat and digested that to actually work out how we fit that in. But our basic thought process was up to the end of the year, we probably want to do twice weekly posts on social media. And then as the 16th picks up, we'll increase that like we did for the meeting before. So we're actively involved in 10 Facebook pages up the whole peninsula around towards Ash up to Salisbury Green, because we believe that the whole peninsula is going to be affected. So that's totals about 39,000 people. So we're trying to, rev up numbers. We have a database now. We understood, it was frustrating the lead up to the 23rd, but we understand the situation with data protection and GDPR. So we've gone around with all of us, we've gone around to all the businesses that have premises in the village, knocked on the doors, got business cards, and so actually got a functional database with an acceptance for why we're collecting that. So we're going to be emailing them. We haven't done anything yet. So we're happy to take charge of the banners and posters and flyers when we need to drum up action. And like I said earlier, we're happy to talk with you about, you know, how we wrap everyone up. We just haven't had time. So what we want to leave this meeting knowing really is how our knowledge can help you or help the other consultees. Who it is that we should be talking to that are in areas that maybe you guys aren't working so deeply with. So contacts and how we move this forward. So I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to talk about the traffic and the transport, and then he'll pass it on to Paul in a minute.
Yeah, morning everyone. I'll stand up, I think. So my name is Robert Hillman. My day job is I specialise in statistical modelling and risk analysis, basically. I'm currently working for central government looking at the resilience of supply chains. I first came to Southampton about 30 years ago to do a PhD in Southampton University, and I've lived in Hamble now for the last 12 years. So I want to tell you a little bit about the areas, the things about traffic that I've been looking at. I sort of see two main areas of concern with CEMEX and possibly with the entire process. Firstly, the methodology that's being used, and then secondly, the baseline data that's being fed into the methodology. I want to give you a couple of specific examples. So firstly, it appears to me that CEMEX's traffic impact assessment is based on a sort of two-step process. And the first test assesses magnitude of impact, and anything below 30% increase in volume is deemed to be negligible. So, to put it simply, a road with 2 cars on it an hour increasing to 4 cars would be described as having a major impact. But if you start with 1,000 cars increasing to 1,299 cars, that is deemed a negligible impact. So this process is intrinsically flawed, but I think it offers CEMEX a loophole that allows them to ignore the fact that at times our roads become incredibly vulnerable and grind to a crawl if not a halt. Now we all know from living here just how frequently our traffic deteriorates, but we've been collecting data and our data can prove this beyond any doubt. So we started looking at data initially because we were baffled by the original submissions from CEMEX, and in particular one of their key claims, which is that average speeds on Hamble Lane are above 31 miles an hour all day long, every hour of the day, even in the morning and in the afternoon. So we started collecting our own data every 5 minutes using Google Maps API. Now, should there be any question about the credibility of that data, fortunately, I think that there shouldn't be an issue because iTransport, CEMEX's consultants have used the exact same data in their latest submission, albeit in a slightly casual way. So our data shows that the traffic is extremely volatile in Hamble, as we all know, and there's no regular peak from one day to the next. Last Friday was a perfect example. Single broken down vehicle caused crawling for over 3 hours coming out of Hamble in the afternoon on Friday. In fact, our data shows that speeds often drop to below 10 miles an hour for the 3.5 journey from Hamble Square up to motorway. CO2 emissions for a vehicle travelling at 10 miles an hour on that kind of trip would be about 5 to 6 times greater than the emissions if you were going at 30 miles an hour. So this unpredictability of the Hamble traffic, I think, would wreak havoc with the quarry operations. But CEMEX's operational efficiency that they require offers little margin for error. For a period of 5 years, as you all know, they require southbound vehicle movement every 2 minutes during the morning peak. But CEMEX have provided no stress tests or contingency for disruptions. And unlike some other road users, us for example perhaps, CEMEX HGV drivers can't work from home, they can't use public transport or delay their journey. The inflexible nature of their scheduling could create chaos on our roads and significantly reducing the network resilience of our roads. Traffic volatility will also materially increase the risks for the health of school children who have no alternative but to walk inches from the HGVs. Ironically, parents acting with their children's best interests at heart could, through a combination of fear, intimidation and rational self-interest, be incentivised to drive their children to school. CEMEX's analysis is not robust to these plausible changes in people's behaviour that might result directly from CEMEX's activities. Policy 12, traffic management of the Hampshire Minerals Waste Plan, which was significant, as you probably know, in the Sheffield quarry refusal a couple of months ago, specifically requires emissions, network resilience and congestion to be considered. But CEMEX has similarly failed to recognise how the fragility of our road network impacts any of these factors. I think that their analysis is amateur at best and negligent at worst. So I've given you 2 examples. We've also considered several other things, including the composition and the number of vehicles coming in and out of the site. We'd be very happy to share the data and technicalities with you. I think overall, the way we see it is that there's really no excuse in 2022 to make irreversible decisions based on weak data and inappropriate and outdated methodologies. But that is what will happen if this process continues unchallenged. What we would like, and specifically from the traffic point of view, is to know what your opinion is to our success in pushing these types of issues. And we'd be interested to know if HPC is engaging any external traffic consultants, and to what extent you can share information about that with us, and how we might be able to best contribute and work together to the same goal that I think we're all trying to get to. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you.
So now we're going to have Paul, who's going to talk about the water management of the site.
So hello there, my name's Paul Coles. I've been resident in Hamble since 2003 and resident of 123 Satchel Lane since 2006. So from a personal perspective, I'm 8 metres below the high point of the airfield elevation drop, and I'm 10 metres from my house down to the river at Creek. So 18 metres elevation over the top of my house. If you go the other way, the windstop corner is about 22 metres, just to give some context. So we'll leave on this as I'm sporting a very dodgy ankle at the moment, so my apologies. So what we've done today, we've forensically analysed the CEMEX report and their mitigations, and we believe there are fundamental flaws in their assumptions and plans to mitigate those risks. We've analysed the Regulation 25 updates, reviewed those and added those to our findings. We've engaged with a range of similar action groups, and Jane will talk about shortly, including Bengio group at Hertford, which successfully fought a quarry application. And I'll come back to that, that's a key point. In Sheffield and Winchester, we produced a summary report of our key findings, and I will go through those in a second. There's 3 key findings for you, so not a long list. We've engaged a panel of expert hydrologists. We have 6 on a panel. We have a flooding consultant, and we have a planner who's also a geologist. And our intention is that by this time next week, or certainly by the 20th next week, we'll engage 1 or more of those experts to, in some cases, validate our findings, but in many cases to actually come up with a formal risk methodology rating. Because in the CEMEX plan, the quarry operations say it generates a low or a low to medium risk. We're certain that's wholly inaccurate. We might actually assert that it's potentially misrepresentative. And from our findings to date, we think it's medium to high risk. If high risk was assigned to the project, it will be immediately rejected based on counter guidance. We've also commissioned a 3D model of the airfield, which is to demonstrate relief topography, to indicate where the groundwater courses run. So that will talk to the culverts and the storm drains. And it also gives a much better indication of where the runoff areas are likely to be. So 3 key areas of risk. One is the horse field. If anybody doesn't know the geography, please shout. So behind 61 Satchel Lane, the proposed Foreman home site, there's a 1.5 metre elevation drop to that position. Site number 2 is Satchel Lane. So anything on Satchel Lane moving east the river is at high risk, because on that side of Satchel Lane, that's a marine clay pad as opposed to chalk. So obviously, you don't need to be a geologist to understand what increased water runoff and clay do to each other and how they interact. And the third most significant area of risk is the one in the far corner of the airfield where the settling point is proposed by the secondary school. according to CEMEX's report, we don't believe that they will be able to retain all the water generated from the processing plants, and I'll come to that in a second. So in terms of key findings, we've got, open my page, 3 key findings, 3 headlines. So the methodology and framework for commissioning that CEMEX are looking to work to is called SUDS, and that's a industry standard that basically assumes that CEMEX can maintain and retain 100% of the water generated by the washing process. We assert that's fundamentally incorrect. One of the key findings for the hydrologists and the other experts will be to support those findings. And we've come to that conclusion based on going through CEMEX's own report, their analysis of ground samples, etc. And we want to back those up with some other analysis, which I'll talk to in a second. The volume of silt generated from the site for processing gravel, we believe is 1.5 to 2 times that CEMEX have declared. It may be an innocent state, but we believe that the assertion is inaccurate and that there will need a much bigger settling pond and or an additional settling pond, which I'm sure National Rail will have something to say about, as they've already raised objections about the current pond and its current location. So there's some discussions about size and location of that settling pond. It may also require the provision of an additional wash plant, which again is not in CEMEX plan, and that's something that we would expect the hydrologist to either validate or challenge based on our findings so far. And then the third one I've already spoken to is the assertion that the flood risk is low to medium. Now, if we talk to the Bengio quarry proposal in Hertford, which was refused, their flood expert was an individual called Dr. Rick Brassington, and his formal assertion of a medium to high flood risk, as opposed to the low to medium flood risk that the quarry operator assigned in that case, was key to that being rejected. So that is a key strand of our activity and focus. So in terms of what we're doing and where we believe we need some support and some collaboration, we're going to finalise those flooding experts as of the 20th of December. We're going to finalise our airfield 3D model, which talks to runoff, which talks to groundwater courses. It will also possibly talk to turbidity, which is a measure of suspended particles. We'll talk about that in a second. We also want to look at the option of putting boreholes, which will measure water flow rates and turbidity again, which is that suspension of particles. So that will tell us how much water, how quickly it flows, and where it flows. We can also measure that at the storm drain by Mercury Creek and a few other locations. So in terms of commissioning, we're allowed to drill to a certain depth without government permission. Beyond that, we need government permission. But in terms of the parish council, that's something we need to talk to you about to understand, could we get support to go and dig a great big hole, or certainly drill a great big hole. And then in terms of agreeing permissions to monitor storm drains, culverts, that's something that we need to do in real time. And there are things we can do there. There are two main methods to do that. One, sounds horrific, it's a low radioactive isotope, which basically measures where the water started and where it finishes and how long it took. But I do say low radioactivity. The second one is to use an inert dye material, but again, we don't want to dye the river fluorescent green. That's completely not what we're about. So, but again, yeah, it is Christmas, so maybe we could go for a themed colour. So essentially, what we're looking for from the parish council is alignment on boreholes, alignment on monitoring culverts and storm drains, and also support in terms of our drainage experts to make sure that if there is a report generated that says it's medium to high risk, it's based on the following accredited expertise, and for the parish council to rubber stamp it and say, yes, we support, that's an accurate assertion.
That's right.
Okay.
Louise over here is going to talk to us about the health implications. Louise is a respiratory physio in the village.
So hello all, I'm also reading some notes to try and keep on track. Just to introduce myself, I'm a fairly new resident to Hamble, so forgive my naivety to the audience in my language. So I currently specialise in long COVID as a respiratory physiotherapist. Part of that is specialising in breathing pattern disorders. I have a background in pulmonary rehab and hospital discharge planning, and particularly during hospitals, so local services. I've worked for a long time in Nottingham, where there's a high prevalence of industry-related lung disease, and I've seen firsthand the devastating effects of interstitial lung disease or pulmonary fibrosis that has on families, on the patient, the families, but also the exponential financial implications to the health care and social services around that. And if you bear in mind our recent context, we have already highly overstretched respiratory services in our local area. I don't want to look back and find that I'm treating something that could and should have been prevented when CEMEX has long finished their project. And if we bear in mind silicosis takes quite some time to develop, but there are other health conditions that I'm concerned that may be developed that aren't being looked at within their documentation, for example, breathing pattern disorders. I would like to understand who all the major consultees and specialists are that have been contacted during this process. I'm openly asking the question, have they been contacted? I'm not sure the due diligence has been done to look into all the appropriate specialists to understand the true context of the health risk for our community. So, for example, British Thoracic Society, Asthma UK, Southampton General Hospital, the RSH Hospital, the respiratory specialists that work in those hospitals, our community pulmonary rehab teams, and also our emergency services that respond on a daily basis to acute respiratory distress syndrome and often panic disorders related to breathing pattern disorders, which can develop as a result of congestion to our nasal passages, which may develop. You see where I'm going. I would suggest that it be essential to start surveying the health of the community now with an evidence-based outcome measures, which I'm happy to support. And if I don't know, I'm sure we can find people that can support. So I also asked the question, is anyone going to be accountable for surveying the health of the population? Although I am also concerned that we won't see this change of health to our population for quite some time after it's too late. As we know that the key risk of silicosis takes potentially 5, 10 or even longer to develop, as it's these very fine small particles within our lungs that are not able to be extracted. So my challenge to you or the other consultees managing health is about getting this correct and sufficient advice from the right health experts. I'm happy to keep continuing researching the facts into the health risk of the community, but recognise that I'm limited by time working full time and I'm not a research expert. I'm reaching out to respiratory experts in my network and again, more than happy to support in understanding the science and anatomy behind some of these various conditions if needed. I also understand that Sheffield had a quarry which was overturned due to having respiratory specialists stand up and declaring the risk to human health. I think we all agree it's vitally important to ensure that we have the facts quickly and now to make sure that we are presenting the risk correctly. Thanks.
Thank you, brilliant. Thank you, Louise.
And now Jane's going to just let you know about this sort of case studies that we've been looking at.
So everybody, my name is Jane Palm and I've been a resident of the village for 9 years. I joined the HPR group to help in whatever way I could. We thought it'd be useful to look into areas where planning applications for quarries have been dismissed, to highlight some similarities and build up a database of research and professionals that we may be able to call upon to help fight our case. The first successful one I came across was Bendigo Quarry in Hertfordshire. I reached out to Mr. Pickering, the chair of Scott Bendigo Quarry, to ascertain how the planning application was overturned. There are some similarities between the two sites, both close to schools and homes, and NGO was included in Hertfordshire's mineral waste plan. Hertfordshire County Council turned down the application on the grounds of the risk of ground pollution, the adverse impact on natural environment, that would harm the amenity of the area, and also the health risks posed. The inquiry was conducted by the Secretary of State, James Brokenshire, who endorsed the inspector's reasons for dismissal, despite it was taken out of the plan. Aska's been very generous with both her time and shared the research undertaken by their professionals. And as a result, we now have field work we can refer to and lay professionals reported on the report we mentioned on those. Other useful things we've learned from NGO is the use of the term urban quarry. We've used this in our posters and leaflets and on social media. You wouldn't build a school next to a quarry, so why put a quarry near a school? We've also used this on our social media to garner community support. It was recognised by James Brokenshire that the local fear and anxiety about short and long-term health risks are legitimate and not irrational, i.e. perception was more important than science in this case. And I think that's quite a useful precedent for us to try and apply. The second one is more local 5 Oaks Farm in Sheffield, which HCC dismissed in October. Although not included in the Hampshire Mineral Waste Plan, there are similarities, namely access to a site from the busy road and close to home. There's many reasons for its dismissal, and these are included on HCC's website. Some of the reasons were unacceptable adverse visual and amenity impact to occupiers of nearby properties, wider impacts associated with heavy goods movements contrary to requirements of policies 10 and 12. And the development is considered to be contrary to policy 2, climate change mitigation and adaptation of the Hampshire Minerals and Waste Plan. But so there are just a few you want to refer to the website. So basically, Sheffield County Council employed professional consultants and had 11 speakers at the inquiry. This included a planning consultant, a Sheffield resident who's a Harley Street doctor, and the hydrologist employed by Meon Valley Golf Club, as they were concerned that surface water would run into their land. David Ogden, the lead at Sheffield PC, and Steve Bissell from the residents group have offered to hold a meeting with us to discuss ways they may be able to help us with our fund. So a couple of useful things that came out of looking at their application was the Ellis Law. Ella's Law. Ella is a 9-year-old who was the first person in the UK to have effects of pollution on her death certificate. Her mother's currently fighting to bring in the Clean Air Human Rights Act, which basically will bring the WHO minimum standards into play. Sheffield Parish Council also noted that the High Court considered when a mistake of fact is made, there may be grounds for judicial review of the planning decision. They said challenge absolutely everything on the applicant's submission. They thought they'd done a good job, but they could have been more dynamic. But I hope by working closely together, we can bring that dynamism. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Jen.
That's us.
Brilliant.
So yeah, we just want to know how we can work together.
Okay, well, I think I'll welcome any comments from anyone else. But the amount of work you've done, I think, is absolutely extraordinary. The quality is outstanding. Yeah, I think hopefully it'll be a big part of what we're going to do going forward. We're going to go and obviously talk on about our organisation for dealing with that in a minute, and you're all very welcome to stay and listen to that. But for now, I'll just ask anyone else who wants to comment on all of that.
Just before you come, I'd just like to credit Steve Wettingstill as well, because he's been really integral in a lot of this work, but he's overseas, that's why he's not here.
You've done a very good job. Can I just say something?
Yes, please.
I think Claire and I said we wanted to try and meet with Emma on Thursday afternoon. I don't know whether you're around Thursday afternoon.
Can you message Jenny?
Yes, perfect.
Great, we just catch up, share our stuff on comms and vice versa.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as we talked about at our last week's coordination meeting, this is at least going to be a weekly cycle for the next couple of months. Anything longer than that, it's just going to already be too late. So I think all of those communication channels are things that we need to exercise, not just on one-off, but we've got to keep working on an ongoing basis. So that's great.
Yeah, I mean, for my part, I'd just say excellent preparation and presentations, and thank you for putting so much time and effort into it. Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely.
Can I just ask, sorry, I didn't get the name of the guy doing the traffic. Robert. Excellent, thank you. One thing that does sort of come to mind is the exit from the quarry onto Hamble Lane, because Hamble Lane suffers from having a number of junctions between the village and the Windover roundabout. I just wondered whether some examination of that feature will be included, because I think that's one of those things that we could not talk about it very much, and it could end up being a real issue.
No, absolutely. I mean, all I can say on that is related to that, they have recently done some more junction analysis, which is basically the combination of desk-based simulation, and then in one day in October, they did a survey. It was a sunny day and everything was great.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there wasn't much traffic. So unfortunately, that is their baseline that then they're feeding into their simulations of what might happen at these junctions. And if there's not a lot of traffic and you add an extra HGV in even every 2 minutes, there's still not a lot of traffic.
No.
So there's a fundamental flaw in it. And I think somehow, you know, we need to sort of get across the fact that their average numbers are not representative. And when the system breaks down, it really breaks down, and like the costs are multiplicative. You know, all goes wrong together, doesn't it? Yeah, so one of the questions I would have is how do we get that across? Because at the moment, it seems to me that their methodology is really set up to sort of disallow that. You know, if they had done a survey on a day like Friday when it was a total gridlock for hours, you'd get completely different results.
But then there are also times sort of in between Friday and that sunny day in October. For example, middle of last week, I was it didn't take very long, but it was a traffic jam that went back from the Hound roundabout back to the station.
Yeah.
And that was because it was soon after a shift change.
Yeah. I think Rob just volunteered to be our point man to go work on traffic part of this.
Yeah.
Because we can't solve it now.
No.
One of the things obviously that we will be talking about is the traffic consultants that we're proposing to hire. And I mean, if you are willing, then we need someone to grab that issue and do the communication as well, because I think just one comment, I think one of the things that we constantly need advice on, and we look to Steve particularly on this, although Mine's got lots of experience as well, is there are issues all over the place. Our trickiest thing, and I think it's really interesting what Jane was saying there, is what are the issues that we can feed in that will actually have an impact on the planning approval process? And that's not necessarily all of the issues we'll actually experience in real life. So I know you're going to speak to that in a bit, or at least tangentially anyway. So I think great that we're all energised and exercised by it. Hopefully this is the beginning of conversations that will run on. We are pretty much at the end of that time slot. So unless anyone has anything particularly burnt in.
You just touched on it. As far as I'm aware, we signed it to the planning transport consultants that we are taking on expertise, because we haven't got that there. I mean, I might be able to say exactly where we are.
Yeah, it's coming up in the next section.
Okay, right. The second one is I found very interesting. You might be able to answer that. You said for one of the cases they called it an urban ground quarry there. Because I know a number of residents have been asking me, they're very concerned that it's been called an urban quarry because everyone, including Senex, accepts that it's agricultural or countryside. And what they don't want to do in own gold is that Senex or Persimmons come back and say, well, local residents see it as an urban brownfield site. So there. So can you explain why you think, or the reason that you're there is, as I said, lots of people have spoken to me and said that the residents calling it an urban site. They're not countryside and agricultural, which they've accepted in their order restoration and everything else Hampshire County Council has.
So let me take that, even though it's not my area of expertise.
Right, that's it. I just want.
So if you also look at the formal responses to their planning proposal for the horse fields, they try to represent Satchel Lane as a rural lane. It's not a rural lane. If you look at the airfield site, it's being presented as a rural site. If you're in the middle of the airfield, it feels as if you're in the middle of the countryside, but it's bordered on 3 sides, which is not typical. I've analysed all current proposed quarry sites in the UK, and I can't find any other single instance of a quarry that has houses and or businesses on 3 sides. They're typically ribbon developments on the edge of a village or truly in the countryside with 1 road in, 1 road out. They don't have housing on 3 sides. So our choice of language is deliberately provocative to make the point that that site is not in the middle of the countryside. It may appear to be when you're in the middle, but actually it's bordered on 3 sides by houses. And then when you add in the elevation of
You said, didn't you used it from some other site that used this. Did you?
Yes, Benjio, basically, because they, because where they're intending to quarry was very close to a school. The entrance would have been right opposite the school, and it was surrounded by housing. It's exactly the same.
Yes, I mean, the problem is that they bring, we know, as in last time, they bring the consultants to cut to the Wessex Manor corner, and it looks like it's just a field in the middle of nowhere. They don't bring them down to the playing field, walk them past this building and go out through there and say this is where the quarry is. So, and quarry brings up, you know, gravel pit, people are kind of like, it's to stir up the apathy in the village to make them realise.
Okay. There's a reason why Cemex have responded quite vociferously in their regulation 25 update from 2 weeks ago. We've hit another.
Okay.
Because
I agree with you.
Which is obviously helpful, but we need to make sure that there aren't unforeseen consequences, as Ian highlighted. So,
you mentioned residents are concerned that it could be an own goal.
Yeah, okay, so we've got that noted. Any final feedback for Emma and the team?
Just one other thing. So we contacted Danny King, who is the the Olympian who has her name on the cycleway, and she came down to the 23rd, and she's not confirmed this, but her feeling is if it became a quarry and the traffic's going across that cycleway, she doesn't want her name on it anymore. So, because it's not a safe place for people to ride their bike.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, everybody. We need to crack on. We've got a minor issue of next year's budget to deal with before the end of the evening. You're very welcome to stay, as we said. Cracking on to number 5. So, item 5, future airfield Cemex application. This is talking now about the work that we've already commissioned and are looking forward to. This is primarily, the purpose of this is primarily to update the rest of the council on what's been going on and what we foresee coming up. Steve?
Thank you. Yes, so as has been alluded to by members of the public in your session, Chairman, the Cemex have now responded to the request for further information. That's the Regulation 25 request for further information, as it's called, and they've dropped a further batch of information which primarily responds to specific issues that were raised in the first round of consultation responses. So it's directed towards answering the questions that have been asked by particular organisations, including the Parish Council. There is a specific note of CEMEX's comments on our comments on the observations, which is, it's good to see them treating those seriously, as they should have done. So what you've got is a range of responses to those issues. I would characterise those responses as no more than they think they need to do in terms of progressing the application. So they're not expansive. Let's say they respond to the particular issues that are raised, and they kind of sort of say, well, there you are. It's not going to be a problem in this issue or that issue, and there's, that's all we've got to say about the matter. The important context for that is that we now understand from talking to the County Council, and Amanda's led in that conversation, that we are now in what in project management terms you might call the glide path to the decision making process in February or March. So effectively the County Council officers, when you're dealing with a major planning application like this, you could go backwards and forwards with the applicants and consultees asking for more information for months and almost endless iterations. And you have to decide as the planning officers, you say, well, there's only so many times we're going to go backwards and forwards. There's a point where we're going to go to the committee and ask for a decision based on the information that we've got. And you have to take a judgment as to whether when you've gone through a reasonable amount of time for information to go backwards and forwards, so that you can then go to the committee and get a decision. And if the decision is to refuse the application, you want to be fairly confident that you've got enough evidence and that you're on a strong enough position, because you'll then inevitably face an appeal against that decision. So we understand from the County Council that they've felt that is the process. I agree with that. I think in terms of the way CEMEX have gone about the process, we don't see any sign of, they've certainly not approached the Parish Council, not responded to the Parish Council in terms of any request for further sort of dialogue. They've not engaged with the general community any further. And they don't appear to have engaged further with any other applicant, consultee in any significant way. There's a little bit of dialogue going on with the County Council Highways team, no less than I would have expected, to be frank, but certainly nothing sort of untoward, as it were, but not much else. And I think that sort of goes to the fact that CEMEX, in my judgment, aren't seeing this as a particularly complicated matter. For them, it is a relatively run-of-the-mill sand and gravel project, of which, with which they are used to engaging. And I think, their process it demonstrates that that's the way they are thinking. I think the material that they have submitted probably leaves the situation, as far as the consultees' feelings, probably pretty close to where they probably were to start with. So what we will see now, and actually it's already started if you go to the county's website, is that the consultees who raised initial questions have now read what's been provided and are starting to come back. So the first couple are very, very simple. So the MOD have come back and said, well, we didn't have any problems before, we had no objection. We've now read what they've submitted and we still got no objection. The county archaeologist has looked at what they've submitted in response to his query. He did have some queries. They've submitted further information and he said, well, that looks good enough. We can condition, meaning we can put a planning condition on any application to deal with any of my other worries. So close enough for his. Obviously, the simple ones come back quickly because they're the ones that don't raise many issues one way or another. And I suspect we'll see the landscape ones come back fairly quickly. They didn't really have a problem with, they didn't raise any particular issues. I suspect that nothing's changed. I'm going to. The complicated ones are the Environment Agency, potentially, although I have to say they didn't raise much on their, I mean, they had a no objection and they didn't raise much before, so they'll need to look at. Lead Local Flood Agency, which is the County Council, in another guise, will have to have a look at the further information on flood risks that's been provided. Although there's not much further information, basically there's just a letter from the consultant saying, actually, we stand by our data and we don't think there's a problem. You know, we don't think you've not highlighted anything for us. We've never had a highways response, so as yet we don't know what the county highways position is going to be. But we do know what our position is on the highways position, and I don't the nature of our argument on highways, I don't believe is changed by the additional data that CEMEX have provided. Although they have filled in some gaps. There was an obvious flaw with their transport assessment, which is it was incomplete. They've and that's important, because if it's incomplete, that means it's not safe, and not a safe basis for making a decision. Right. They've now filled in the gaps, but the extent to which that information proves their points is moot, of course, and we say no. There's interesting issues around the issues raised by Natural England in terms of best and most versatile agricultural land and soil management. Those look quite interesting, and CEMEX, that's the one area where CEMEX have actually done quite a lot of work in response to that, and that to me says they were slightly thrown by that response, because they've done quite a lot of work to look at the quality of soil on the site. And I suspect we may get into an argument about whether it is agricultural land or not. And this is, you know, this kind of thing that goes back into history tonight, because there is clearly a debate going on around that, and that is something that we would want to raise, I'm sure. And the other aspect that I don't think CEMEX have actually provided anything more useful on is in terms of restoration and future management. And I think all the points that we have raised in the past about that issue remain unimproved, as it were, by anything that CEMEX have responded on. So, in terms of the further work, should I mention the highway consultant, Amanda?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah. So at the parish council's request, we and picking up points rightly been made by members of the public around looking at the highways issues, because it's not highways modelling is not my area of expertise, so we need to look at that. We have appointed consultants to look at that. They are a very good quality firm based in Godalming called RGP. They do work on both sides of planning arguments, as do all consultants. Well, I say all consultants, actually all consultants don't do work on both sides. Actually quite a lot won't work on the side of objectors, but RGP have agreed to do that. Although their role at the moment is quite clearly to provide analysis of data and modelling, rather than to provide arguments, as it were. We can provide the arguments, we need the technical assessment. Thing to say about that, and I did listen very carefully to the points that were made, is that, and I don't disagree from my experience of looking at highway modelling and so on. However, we do have to, I do have to advise that the planning system recognises modelling being done in certain ways, and it's, whilst challenging the underlying principles of that modelling is always an interesting exercise, it's not always it won't get you necessarily the results that you expect, because there are certain proxies, certain assumptions, certain ways of doing things which are built in to the modelling and highways assessment arguments, which are always there. And the same goes actually in terms of health impacts and so on, where the planning system, as it were, requires that planning authorities in decision making make certain assumptions that the government places in front of them, and it's a heck of a task to undermine those foundations of those things and win that argument, to prove that sand and gravel extraction has a significant health impact when the government effectively says no, it doesn't, is, you know, that's a heck of a challenge, and it may turn out that it was one that someone should have taken on. You know, history does indeed have a habit of doing that to us, but I would just not caution, because I'm not suggesting that we need caution, but I'm just the reality, the pragmatic position is that the planning system works with certain assumptions. So I don't believe that CEMEX have provided a response that really shifts the dial very much in terms of the arguments that we have initially made. They have filled in some gaps, but whether that gap filling is convincing argument is another matter. The other thing to bear in mind, which is relevant and interesting, is of course that the county council is doing this partial review of the minerals and waste plan now. And although that plan, the policies in that plan, insofar as they change, won't be used for determining the CEMEX application, the evidence base that they're drawing from, of course, is something that we can draw upon. And I've been looking at that material, and there are some interesting things in there, which we will, which I'll bring to the parish council's attention, and will no doubt form part of our response to both of those. So that's where we are, Chairman. And I think in terms of moving things forward, there isn't any need for everything to go through one single channel. You know, there is not just one chance for Hamble to respond, or the county council will not just acknowledge one Hamble response. What would be sensible is to try to ensure that the responses that come from Hamble, as well as all the individual responses that members of the public make, of course, try to sort of either hit the same point multiple times or hit different points, because the amount of time, effort and energy that is available to go into the process needs to be coordinated. So it's not a question that everything needs, say, well, we only get one chance to write a letter. We don't. But what we should do is to make sure that we don't trip over, the parish council and members and community response doesn't trip over, and that they coordinate their arguments.
Okay, so effective use of resources and alignment to the extent that we're not undermining each other.
Exactly so.
Perfect. Anyone like to ask please any questions on that update? No, sorry. We'll talk to you after, Emma.
That's all right.
It's not you mentioned it. I've never known a council department like transport not answering their position when it's a consultation stage. Is there a stage where they've got to say their position there, or can they leave it right to the Rotary Committee? Because I would think that their response should be part of the consultation there. You've had more experience of this.
No.
I haven't had a council department all my years of doing planning here and everything there. I've never seen it as late as this.
It's not, through you, Chairman, it's not at all unusual for where you have a complex planning application, or a large scale, actually this is not a particularly complex planning application in many ways, but where you have a large planning application, not at all unusual for a highways department to sort of reserve its position, to say we need more information and so on. But it is quite unusual for it to avoid identifying the issues that it is concerned about to the extent that they have this time. They've sort of hidden behind the fence, haven't even sat on it. So asking for more information, that's not unusual, because, and even saying, well, we're not sure yet whether we're rejecting or not, but they have been very reluctant to share information. And I should say, things like the road safety side of things, there is information going backwards and forwards, but as it goes backwards and forwards and we can see it, it shows up some interesting things that might be going on here. But they will have to, the county council officers on the planning, they will have started to pull together their report. Their report will be many pages long. Some bits of it they could already write because they know the policy position on this, that, or the other. And then they will have to fill bits in. And the highway stuff is going to be really, really important. If I was, I suspect that will be the most the most difficult part of this for them to write.
Did they do that after the consultation stage?
Oh yes, they could, and they will be weighing that up.
Letters in, can't we, right up to the meeting?
Oh, yeah.
There, but it doesn't give us much time to.
No, and I have been discussing this with Amanda, and we will be putting pressure on the county council to identify what their position is in highway terms very clearly.
Well,
as soon as possible.
She
has, yes.
Sheila.
Really a very brief question, just to clarify something to Steve's review. I assume it doesn't meet any of the criteria to be called in for decision by the Secretary of State.
I don't think so. I mean, I can't see why it would be why the Secretary of State would call it in for his decision-making purposes. Yeah. No.
It's really to rule out whether it's even worth thinking of.
Yeah,
I suspect the answer is no, but I think it's
I can't see any complication at this stage.
And sorry, I've got a supplementary. Can I actually ask a question of our attendees?
Not if you want an answer.
It's really well, I'll ask afterwards.
Yeah, perfect. Sarah.
We
keep talking about the time frame, don't we? Back and forth, back and forth. Do we have any idea what the time frame is going to be in terms of months or years?
Oh yes. I think we've had a fairly clear indication in discussions with the case officer that she feels that the application now should be going forward to, for decision. As I say, in some ways, although the issues are very, there are incredibly important issues, but then it's not one of these very complicated situations. It's quite a simple proposition. Can we extract sand and gravel from this site? And these are the issues that it raises. That's relatively simple in plain terms. So Lisa's view is that CEMEX have had enough, they've taken several months to reply on the Reg 25. They've given their information, and effectively what she's saying is, right, on that basis, the county council is going to take its decision. So as from the applicant's point of view, from better or worse, you're going to get your decision on the basis of the information that you provided. I think we're thinking March would be probably the most likely. So that's not far, that's not very far away now.
And one more question. In your recommendation, do you think that we should go ahead and get this highway impact review with our GP? Is that what it is?
Oh yeah, yes.
It is underway. Okay, we've already okayed it.
Yes, and that will be helpful.
Steve, do Hampshire find themselves in a difficult position in as much as if they agree to this application, they, by doing so, agreed that there is no traffic problem on Hamble Lane, having in the past couple of years prepared a very detailed plan on how they will address the issues in Hamble Lane and allocated, in theory, a large budget to do so.
Yes. I think they do, and that is why the highways team is thinking carefully about its response. It is not just a data-driven response.
Okay. Go on.
Very quickly, if it goes through for a decision in March and Hampshire County Council agrees, do we get a right?
No. So this is clearly going to run. We'll be doing a weekly update for everyone from the weekly coordination meeting, which I think is the most likely source of updates specifically around these areas. But as we will be meeting up weekly, if anyone from council has any questions, then that feed those in, and we'll obviously try and make sure that's picked up in that cycle. We did have one decision to make under this agenda item, which is the date of the public meetings we proposed to hold in January. When the agenda went out, we were thinking of the first week in January. Practically, that doesn't look like it's going to work, and we're probably hoping that we can agree on dates in the second week of January. Amanda.
So we're looking at the 11th and the 12th. The 11th would be an afternoon meeting, probably starting at 1:30 and ending by 3. The 12th would be the evening meeting, and will probably start at 7 and end at 8:30. We have chopped and changed with meetings with Hamble Parish structures, and we are struggling to get a response from them at the moment. So as soon as we've got that, we will confirm. The downside of that means that we had intended to run an exhibition the week later to actually post what people had told us. I think given how close we'll be running up to the deadline, that's not going to be possible. So we'll probably have to do that online and through other mechanisms.
So unless there's any concerns about that, so that's 2 meetings of a repeat meeting, different times of day, to hopefully make it accessible to different groups in the community. So can we just take that as...
Yeah, as long as nobody's objecting.
Cool, that's it. Right, there's a whole bunch of stuff about communications that do you want to update on comms under that heading?
Yeah, so the comms working group has put together some thoughts on how we approach the next few weeks in terms of communicating with the residents. Essentially what we're saying is little and often through as many channels as possible, because we feel that we want to use our resource to reach as many different people in the community as we can. We're very aware that too much emphasis on social media doesn't reach a lot of the other people within the community. So we've got, in the next few weeks, for example, we've got a special edition of the newsletter which we're writing this week. We've got notice boards where we're posting weekly updates on our activities. We're producing tear-out posters for people to put in their windows to publicise the public meeting. And we're just kind of pressing ahead with social posts, website updates, and just really keeping people informed as best as we can.
No, I just wanted to say while we're here, we are going to obviously be stretched to deliver all this. So the more help we can get from residents to maybe do their own rate or something would be obviously something we would need. Thank you.
We have a list of about 23 questions.
Any more questions for Claire on the comms side from around the table? Okay. Thank you. That's a bit of a marathon, but obviously it's by far the biggest issue that we're facing. So yeah, I don't suppose it'll be the last time we have a similar session on CEMEX. We're good to move on.
Yes.
Right. So item 6 on the agenda is really an update item. I think Hamble 2050 right now is 100% aligned with CEMEX and the other work surrounding that. So no additional new information on Hamble 2050. So-called cost of living crisis. I asked Amanda to put this on the agenda because whilst CEMEX is really important, there's other stuff going on in the world as well. We did say it was going to be important that we tried to keep on top of this. Last time we talked about it, yeah, we need to try and make sure it stays on the radar if we're serious about it. By way of introduction, I would say, obviously, as a council, we have no resource to actually make any difference to anyone in any practical sense. My suggestion for discussion really is that it would be an awful shame if people didn't get access to things that were available purely because they didn't know about it. So it seemed to me that as a council, it would be sensible for us to talk about and try and move towards some kind of mechanism where we could try and make sure the best and the latest information is made available to everyone who needs to know about it. But really, I think for now, just round the table for anyone who can add. Thanks very much, Steve. Add anything to that thinking. Realistically, I think we're looking towards engaging Amanda and the team probably end of first quarter next year. But going into next year when a bit of time and capability is available. But if they're going to go and do something that's aligned with our thinking, we better do the thinking. So really, that's all I've got to introduce this particular agenda item. Open to anyone else.
So I just wanted to add, there are a number of government tools and Shire council tools that are available to everybody that can help make sure that people are claiming the extra funding.
I think we need to find a way of tapping into all of that if we're going to do something. Sarah?
We've obviously got the food scheme. We've got the Hamble Food Bank, which is going really well at the moment, and that's been expanded. There's a lot of areas in Hamble are now doing collections. We've got the citizens' advice, where we've got the 2 outreach centres. We've got Pylands and we've got our own Hamble. We've also got the new snug thing happening on a Friday at lunchtime, which has been set up by 2 ladies. I know we gave the grant for 250. I was also hoping, and I know I've got 2 great relationships going with BP and also with Supervision, that maybe we could approach them because they're all up for doing something. And that would be a good way of filtering their finances into something that we are thinking about doing.
To follow off what Sarah said, I was speaking to one of the ladies just with all that arranging it. The only issue that is not getting enough people in there.
Right.
So if there's anything you can do to get the message out wider.
I mean, I don't know how are they funding it? They had the grant, but how are they funding these weekly lunches?
Well, I presume from their own resources, but the concern that she had was not enough people turning up.
So not enough people know about it.
Essentially.
Can I ask you, this is the Quarry Centre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But there's not many people turning up.
It's new, but
Yeah,
and the message out there more.
Kim's been on holiday, so they're getting it together. But I do think, as we had that meeting, when we went to Cooper Vision and they left and said, is there anything you want from us?
Yeah.
I think this would be a great way for them to support the community with something like that.
Yeah.
All I was going to say, I think we've made a good start in the village magazine, all the read there, getting this information, just you're saying, all the ground. First thing that Trevor did on energy, a number of people came back and said, I didn't know about that and everything there. It can't be too, I keep saying, too long, because they're not going to read it all, but I think us drip feeding through the magazine, these new ones, if you can provide something, it has been well received there, but not too long because they start getting confused.
Also, as a side to that with the food bank, there's a repository in the co-op at Corrie Parade, and you can put other stuff in. It doesn't have to come from the co-op. A lot of people think you can only put stuff in the co-op. And so that's something that needs to be, again, better understood.
I'll put another post on. There's also that take a tag. They're doing, Co-op are doing take a tag off the Christmas tree. I've been going in there, moving the trolleys away, take a tag off the Christmas tree, you buy for a boy or a girl of an age and bring the present back, and they've been promoting that, which is quite good.
And
This is something which is in some sense similar to our response to some extent. Somebody, I'm not saying us, needs to bring all the disparate groups to a focal point. So they all speak with one voice, they all communicate, they all participate in information in the same way. Because they're all at the moment, it seems to me, just firing off individually. And maybe we could encourage all those groups to just get together for a chat and nominate a focal point to direct their energy.
And then that could be a regular post in our newsletter.
Perfect.
What about good neighbours? They seem to be doing good work. They seem to know the clientele.
That's been going a long time, isn't it?
Yes, I was going to say, it's only suggested, I'm just off the top of my head, because I said, when are we going to have these meetings there, people are not going to turn up, especially as we're saying about the new primary centre there. People don't know about it, and because I understand that the Good Neighbours did something memorial last week, which was very well attended. It wasn't to be seen as something, I'm begging for something, or I'm in difficulty, you know, put the flag up there. It was just there, and that's the kind of arena that it could be spread and find Andy's, they might be the.
Okay, so maybe in the coming days, we could just offline collect all of those touch points together electronically. At least that will give us something as a starting point. And then any other thoughts? I think this is something that we're going to have to come back to on a regular basis, if not necessarily a frequent basis. However, we're now 2 minutes behind schedule, and we have the delightful question of the budget to move on to. So everyone is free to leave at this point. Budget. So yeah, all the excitement and enthusiasm for sorting out the CEMEX, we now need to apply to sorting out the budget. Yeah, well, exactly, and I think that is exactly the starting point for the discussion of the budget. Amanda's going to take us through a couple of scenarios that we're looking at. But what Simon and I have been, thanks very much, guys. What Simon and I have said to Amanda in a weekly update session is, however bleak the budget outlook is, if we're serious about trying to do any of this stuff, now isn't the time when we can also try and pare everything to the bone. So given that, what we've sort of said to Amanda as a starting point is, let's look at a set of numbers that have essentially a 10% increase baked into it. Anything less than that, and something's going to have to give somewhere. Anything more than that is certainly going to be a tough sell. But that's the starting point that we thought was sensible. At the end of this session, we have to give Amanda some kind of direction as to what we think that sort of gross level number looks like, what we think is achievable, bearing in mind the risks and the unknowns that we're going to face next year. If we are serious about taking on CEMEX, that could end up with hiring lawyers and doing judicial review. Quite frankly, if we're not serious about that, we should decide now and adjust our strategy accordingly. We've got some other underlying things going on in the team. We know about Chris and the impact that that's having on the salary side. So there are some things that are going to flush through during next year. But all in all, there's an awful lot of unknowns. There's an awful lot of risks. And somehow we've got to try and put a budget together that allows us some fighting chance of getting through next year. So no pressure, Amanda, but over to you.
Well, if I can start off by thanking Robin, because actually Robin has stepped in while I've been busy doing the CEMEX work, has actually run most of the budget scenarios that we're going to talk through tonight, so I'm indebted to him for doing that. I think the first thing to start off with is to say that at the moment, if you're in a Band C property, then your payment that you're going to be making to the council in this year is £130, which actually, for everything they get, seems to me quite good value for money. That means that overall we've been collecting from the village 253,000, give or take. So we then looked at what the different percentage scenarios were going to be. And from those of you that have sat through these budget briefings before, you'll know that actually 5% sounds a huge amount, but in reality, actually, it always ends up being quite small amounts. So if we were looking on 5%, we would be looking to increase the current charge by £7 to householders. And that would generate not very much money at all, just over 1,000, actually it would generate, just over 12,000. So that is a reasonably enough amount of money. but it's not enough. At 7%, it would be an increase of £9 per household and would actually generate 17,000. And at 10%, which is what Chris has been talking about, we would be charging £143, so an extra £13, extra £14, and we would be looking at generating 25,000. So that's the premise we've been working on. Now, the one issue I'm struggling a bit with is where we're going to end this financial year, because we've got a lot of additional costs coming in. So that does impact what reserves we're likely to be using next year. So to try and get us down to the 10%, because we're still not there at the moment we're still 15,000 short. So where possible, I have taken one-off expenditure out of the revenue budget and put it into the earmarked reserves. So that takes off pressure from us having to tax people for it. But the downside of that is that money's only there and we can only spend it once. And since Robin's joined us, we've been going through that reserve fund with a degree of speed, which is what we wanted. We wanted to see these projects concluded. But it does mean now that we're getting very close to being at the point we can't dip into reserves much further. So just as a very quick overview, we've got 50,000 in our savings account. We've got 120,000 at Eastleigh in effectively an easy access account we can get out within a week. And our current bank account is standing at 49,000, which isn't enough to get us to the end of the financial year. We do have income coming in, so we're about to start the Dingy Park period, which is always a very large sum of income that hits our accounts late in the year. Our car parking income has been looking good throughout the year, so we're still expecting income from there. And you'll know from Sarah's issues at previous meetings that we've still got a number of sales invoices that are outstanding. So although at the moment the income line's not looking good for this year, as we get closer towards the end of the year, it may look better. But my concern is that if we draw down on the 120,000, we are probably going to start causing the auditor to twitch slightly. Now, had we stayed with our old auditor, I don't think Eleanor would have been particularly minded. She always said to me between 3 and 6 months. When I spoke to Tim, who's the new auditor, one of the first things he said is, I think your reserves are looking light. And I said, really, you've got 120 set aside? He said, no. He said, in this climate, I think you should be looking at more than that. So I think you're certainly entitled to use that, and I think you could go probably as low as 80, 90,000 and still be in a reasonably safe position. But I guess what the last few years has shown us is that things come out of the woodwork. You end up with something like a pandemic that you don't plan for, and the costs that are associated with that have been very significant. And I think the other big one for you is probably some of the uncontrolled costs, which are around staffing costs and changes to the staffing structure. So, for example, this time next year, you may well still have me in post, but you may have somebody else in post as well. And so that we can do an effective handover, you may be looking at doubling up on some of that payroll issue. At the moment, we don't know what that's going to look like. So it is a cautionary note. So 15,000 we've got to find. Are there any easy options that any of you want us to look at? So grants, we could reduce our grant programme down. So the last couple of years, we haven't spent 4,500. We've spent about 3,200, and that's where I think it will rest this year. But that's on the basis that the church hasn't made a grant request, and they haven't done for the last few years, because we actually get them money to go out and buy lawnmowers. So that's the way of dealing with it. But they could come back and ask for some money towards the clock. That's always been part of the understanding. So if we do cut it too far, we might not be able to meet that particular requirement.
How long is it going to take with you, Vicar, to figure it out?
Hopefully not. Hopefully it will take them a little while. Office rent, we don't know about that going forward. We've not been told by the Memorial Hall what they're intending to charge us next year. Usually it goes up by RPI, but I know they've said to me they want to reintroduce the heating element that they took out a couple of years ago. So we used to pay our own heating. They then included it within our rent and increased the rent accordingly. Of course, now what they're finding is actually they're out of pocket, so they want to change that arrangement. So that's the coffee machine heating now. So we're not sure about that. We've taken out small sums of money, postage we've dropped, catering, which we have team meetings we've taken out. Put some money in for things like elections, because elections when they come are expensive and we don't want to have to pay that out in 1 year. I think probably, because we could spend all night going through this. I've sent you the spreadsheet. If there's anything in here that you think we could take out of revenue and put into earmarked reserves, let me know. And Andy, that's probably particularly for you because it would be largely your assets that we're talking about. If there's any expenditure we can defer a year, so we were talking about bins and you asked me to put 8,000 in and we've agreed to put 4,000 in and put the rest of the bin expenditure into a future year. So that's another option. Can we push forward some of that expenditure? There's nothing in here for Mount Pleasant for the play area, and we know that is going to have to be done shortly. And we know that's going to be around 150,000. So we're going to be into the realms of probably borrowing to do that sort of thing. But yeah, so I think go through that list and any comments you can come back as quickly as possible. Actually, one of the other areas was the newsletter. I don't know how many times you've been through the newsletter, but at the moment, when you look at the printing cost and the distribution cost, you're up to £9,000. You could stop that overnight. You could say, right, we are going to make this electronic. We're going to do some paper copies and have those in central collection points, but we are going to get that print cost right down. And we're actually also going to not use the delivery agents we use. We're going to actually build up a network of volunteers. I wouldn't necessarily say you'd want to do that from the start of the financial year, but you can halve the costs and aim to do it from July time. And I do think we should do that. We could look at whether we could increase the advertising costs, but we've not been very successful at that. So I don't think there's much scope in that. Car parking fees. I don't know if I even want to speak it, but having caused such a kerfuffle, we did say, well, actually, should we go a bit bigger on it? Because whereas in the past we've always thought we were going to have to align our charges with Eastleigh, hence all the difficulties we've had. What's come out of it is that actually, as long as we're only increasing our charges and we're not actually taking away spaces or privileges that people have already got, we don't need to go through a formal notification process. So it does mean we can do what we want now with those fees going forward without aligning with Eastleigh. So despite all the pain and discomfort, actually that probably has been the comfortable thing to come out of it, which I'm sure they'll be glad of. So we've looked at £1 per hour. Have you got an appetite to increase that? Could it go up to £1.50 an hour? Bearing in mind the number of car parking permits we issue. So we issue 250 permits.
Could we have a seasonal increase? You pay more in the summer.
You probably could. I don't know how it would work. We could look at it. I mean, it might be complicated because of the way that the programming works in the machine. And we might find that actually the cost of reprogramming each season wipes out any benefit from it.
You pay more at weekends.
Or you pay, yeah, you might be able to do something like that.
Yeah, because that's people coming from outside.
Yeah.
Can we reduce the permit, the allocation of permits?
I think that could be falling into the reducing the concessionary period in the square. At the moment, we print 250 a year, and this year we had 10 left over, and that's pretty typical. We often have a few left over. You could take the decision to reduce it down to 200, and a couple of people would miss out.
Not everybody
Seems a lot.
Not everybody has a permit.
Uses them.
No, I've got a permit and I don't necessarily.
No,
I paid in, but I'm not sure I don't.
The thing with taking spaces, we weren't getting the money in. It's not going to get us more money in. It's going to, in fact,
give us less money.
Less money. And the bad publicity.
Yeah.
As always is the case, folk car parking has taken over this agenda item. But I think what I'm hearing is there's strong consensus that says we're quite happy to charge people who are visitors because actually they come to Hamble and it's the only way we get money out of them, the council. So any strategy that focuses on that, as long as.
Businesses.
Yeah.
I think we'll do it at the weekends. It's the only time.
Yeah. So that's.
I have another idea, we spend an immense amount of money has been spent on benches.
Yeah.
And a lot of the benches have name plaques on them, but are difficult to maintain support and interest in once the person has had it named as years go on. Is it possible to introduce an annual fee? If you have someone's name on a bench, they have to pay an annual fee to have that name left in perpetuity as long as they pay the fee. A bit like you do a diggy space.
I don't think you could do it retrospectively.
I don't.
So I think for those that are already in existence, you couldn't.
And you've shortened it already, haven't you?
We have, it's down to 10 years now, so.
But for new ones, you could.
Yeah, for new ones, you might be able to.
So that actually might give a better than a 10-year period, as long as people are prepared to pay it.
So what we have done already, in a way, we've probably done it in a different way. We have increased it from 250, I think it was, wasn't it? The benches historically were 250, weren't they, down at the foreshore, and they're now 450. 450. So in a way, we've built in that maintenance going forward in that much higher charge. Yeah, but at less time. And what we're finding is there is some resistance to it. They're not going as quickly as we hoped. But I do think equally we need to do a bit more of a push on those as we get into the summertime. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think it's going to produce an immediate response given what we've already done.
And I think we have to look at trying to get the community involved in the newsletter and delivering the newsletter.
Absolutely.
That just seems to me to be a.
And they jump in it. I mean,
And then you actually say it's either this or you don't get one or you.
Claire and I have talked about it. Obviously, I wanted to see more advertising in the magazine, but it just doesn't happen. The Christmas one was great. Cut up that voucher, go and have your 3-for-1 roast dinner, and everyone's talking about. But like you say, we've tried it, and it just isn't happening at the moment. Electronically is the way to go, I think. But equally so, we do need to reach out to the older generation that don't do it electronically. So we did discuss the fact of putting maybe by the square those distributors, and maybe dot a few of those around the village.
I think that sort of not been very chairman-like. I think that's group who can't do the electronic newsletter. It's the same group that probably need information about the So I think there's a number of reasons why we need to try and find out who that group was. So back to the original action of sharing all their touch points and getting that list together. I think that's such a powerful thing for us if we had it. Sorry, I'll go back to the
off the subject, not what I was going to say, that we did have volunteers for Christmas. It worked very well. People were happy to do it. It was just getting the person to coordinate it. Go for Andy. Yeah. In the end, it always ended up on the clerk if something went wrong. And that's not what we wanted. But the volunteers were very happy to do it. And they were subscribed, even if it was 20 in a row. We just need to coordinate it. There were plenty of people. Now I'm going back to one question. One answer to you. You said in this budget when we think, we go for judicial review. The answer to that is no. We haven't got 100 to 200,000, which it would cost. We would be going through Eastleigh. My second question is, do we know what Eastleigh are thinking about in their budget increase?
Well, no, I don't know what their taxation is. They've got to find 3 million. That's their target for this year and 3.5 for next year.
Yeah, I know.
Which is why they've got a lot of redundancies running.
My question for that was, they've always been no. If they were going for 10%, us going for 10% would be too bad. If they were only going for 3% again, it's just how it looks. Not what the budget is, but we've still got to work the budget.
I think it would be 1% below the rate of inflation. Is what they'll look at. So it will be 9% probably.
It was a much bigger base.
No, it's just when did you want our ideas? Did you want us to discuss them now?
Well, I think we can't spend all night on it. So I think any thoughts that you have got that you think would be useful. I have one other to throw into the pot, which is we haven't got entire agreement on it, but it's about selling our tractor. So the tractor's 20 years, 25 years old. It's really quite a vintage model, really. What we're finding, was there a conversation about this at assets? So I don't know how you finalise this, but I think it's one we need to look at.
I think we sent it back to Robin
Yeah, I think
to ask the estates team whether how much they actually, because I think I questioned how much do they actually use this.
Yeah,
so we don't think they use it a lot.
In very simple terms, the thought was that if we, rather than buy maybe an electric van or something, we bought maybe instead of Sparky, we bought a four-wheel drive off-road type electric vehicle that could double up as a tractor, but could also scoot around the village. So you see them on estates, you know.
As Sheila was saying, at the meeting there, I don't think we called it, were we? That Sheila was saying, we really need some facts and figures there. We might not need it. If they're only doing this once every 2 months, we could go and rent one rather than.
Well, this is wrong.
We need some more information.
I think we have a separate discussion with Andy outside this and agree it, but it will generate 6,000 and it also reduce our maintenance costs, and I think.
Okay, so Andy,
yeah, we'll carry that through.
you can blame Sheila apparently, but.
Yeah, I take full responsibility for this one.
Okay, so
Just make one final point with my sort of assets hat on. We are going to get ourselves into some strategic difficulties if we're not careful. Because if, for instance, we are forced to replace the play equipment at Mount Pleasant, that then really pre-designs the plan for the redevelopment of the whole area. You know, where we're going to put the new parish office, where we're going to put the scope, because that will then have to remain in the place it is now, which may not be ideal for us. But we may be forced into that situation. Then we'll have to be creative, and we've already had a few ideas, haven't we, about how we then get ourselves out of that situation we've made for ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's something that you.
Yeah, that's something we've got on.
You've got on the radar.
We're on the back burner with that.
Okay.
So actually, because I'm not here for a few days, if I could have your comments back by Tuesday next week, that would be great. So it gives you a little bit of time to think about it, and if you need side conversations or want to check in with me or Robin, that would be a good opportunity.
No, I was just questioning the festive lighting is down at 30. Oh, actually 2,300. I read it as 2,300, but it's down as actually 3,400. Seems quite.
You think it seems a lot?
Yeah.
Why are you thinking about that? Tony, do you want to?
I was just thinking about how I might attack it. I was just wondering if we're up to date with the grants that we might be able to claim.
We are. We've got one outstanding grant for £2,000 from Eastleigh for bins, and that's it. And this is the difficulty with them tightening their belts, that actually the amount of money available from them has dried up. There is still a provision at their end for 100 let me get this figure right, about 114,000 for Mount Pleasant, but that is the whole of the redevelopment, not just the play area. So if we called on that for the play area, that might cover that liability of the other one, which I know nobody wants to countenance, but if Satchel Lane's approved, there will be grant coming through from that route, and certainly that can cover off some of the play area. And also will increase our tax base as well, so that would be a secondary issue. But it's not huge amounts of work. Certainly the council tax increase, the base isn't big enough to get excited about, but the grants they could be quite sizable.
Is there, for the redevelopment of the kids area in Mount Pleasant, is this going to ask BP or Coopervision, is there something that they will better make a reasonable contribution to?
There is, certainly. I asked Clive at Coopervision whether or not he'd be interested, for example, in sponsoring the adult gym out here. And he said, well, how much is it? And I said, around 10,000. He said, well, we haven't got that sort of money. So I think you could maybe get some money from them, but I think it's going to be much smaller than it's been in the past.
Everybody's suffering.
Yeah. Okay, so does that give you everything you need?
It does, thank you.
For trying to work on the budget. When will you come back to us with a? something we need to actually approve?
So it comes to the January meeting, which, so just on that, because there are some procedural issues linked to it. Our meeting is on the, so we're due to meet on the 9th of January, but we won't have had our public meetings later that week. And our response that needs to go back to county has to be on the 16th. So I don't think when we meet on the 9th, we will have the CEMEX response for you to sign off, but you will have the budget. So my recommendation probably is that we have delegation, or I have delegation to submit it, and then we'll ask the February meeting to sign it off formally. But it does mean that there isn't a meeting that people can come to specifically around our CEMEX response, but it's just where it falls. There's not much we can do about that. So yeah, sorry, it comes on the 9th. You'll have a suite of options, but probably with 10% being made.
Okay, suppose we move on from budget. Members' issues, as far as I'm aware, there's not any been raised.
There were two, I think, while we get the process bedded in. So just so everyone understands, if you're going to bring an item forward this way, if you can produce a short note that says, what is it you're trying to achieve? How much do you think it's going to cost? How much time is it likely to take the office team? Because one of the things that council has to consider when you're looking at these types of things is, for example, the defibrillator. Is it more important to get the defibrillator in, or is it more important to start the work on Hamble cost of living crisis? Because we can't do both at once quite often. So the reason for you bringing forward papers is so that people then can make an active decision about whether or not we want to support it, and if we do, what sort of timescale we look at. So the two suggestions that we had, both of which are great, and I'm hoping we might make progress on the DFID before Jan anyway. If we can have those short papers, just some ideas, and then that gives everyone a basis to talk from. And we'll see how it goes. If it needs to be tweaked a bit, we can do that.
Okay. Yep. Excellent, thank you. 9.
Chief.
We held a meeting with the personnel working group, and I think the main thing that is that, as you know, Jess joined this morning. Simon has moved across to the estates team, and also, but equally, we are going to be incurring some additional costs with training Jess, who has come not as a fully qualified financial assistant. She also has a different job title. And it's a temporary appointment for 6 months, which will be reviewed at the end of 6 months. She's bright, and we're hopeful that she will gather up and become a sort of focus for IT. And I think it's really good to have somebody younger have a younger mix as well. She's also very sociable and has worked in the village a lot, so some of you will already know about her.
It was on Jess, and I think I should take part. She's quite a
Yeah, right.
I don't think I should be included in that.
No, that's fine.
But if anybody's got any questions, I don't know how Chris is. I have to look to Amanda for this.
I'm not sure I know actually, Sheila. I haven't heard from him for probably 10 days or so. He's off on holiday at the moment, and the application is going in for his ill health retirement, I hope, before Christmas.
I think that's as much as.
Yeah.
Is there anything else I have to? We will have the pay rise for the local government staff has been agreed. And presumably it will be in December.
Yeah, that was done. Yeah,
that's done.
Just a note on Jess, I think hopefully it should be a very good appointment.
Yeah, you know.
And very intelligent and very keen as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, she had very cogent reasons as to what she wanted to do in the week. And you do, as Amanda said, do bump up in and say that. Yeah. We will have one other item under exempt business.
But that's exempt.
That's exempt.
Okay, well, that's brilliantly brought us pretty much back onto schedule. Thank you, Sheila. However, item number 10, fees and charges might take us a long way off again. Now, as I understand it, there is this proposal that we do need to vote on this item. Are you going to talk us through it, Amanda?
I can do, yeah. I'm just sorry, I forgot to use it.
Okay.
So just to tell you where we've got to so far. This has been through the asset committee, so a lot of the issues come from them as a recommendation. But just on the covering note, I have suggested 2 extra areas that I think it's worth us including. One is the Mudland moorings, with the ambition of getting at least 4 of those up and running this year, so they would come in at £489. And the other is that at the moment, Hamble Sailing Club use the southern foreshore for things like the warming pan event, and I'm suggesting that we charge them £50 per event for that use as well, just as a way of trying to generate an extra piece of income. So those were 2 additional suggestions. Perhaps we might just run through the ones that I think are most controversial. Allotments and burials and memorials. Largely, we felt that we'd got to the maximum point we could on those, and we weren't going to look at any additional increases. Car parking charges we know about, other than you're suggesting that we look at differentials, which I think is sensible. It would be quite helpful to know at this stage what you want to charge for plot permits next year, and I think our view is in here we've put increase to £17, but I'm thinking possibly, given the situation we're in, you might want to think about taking that up to £20 this time next year. The Roy Underdown Pavilion, we've talked about maintaining the differential between the first hour and the ongoing hours. So we'd have an hourly charge of £20 for the first hour and then £18 thereafter, which still is quite cheap in relation to some of the other hiring spaces. But what we have found is that a lot of our hirers have fallen off over the last couple of months. So actually, where we've got really strong income over the summer, that's died off a little bit. So I don't know if that's it. I mean, I can't see it as price sensitivity because it hasn't changed. But I know that the company that we're using it decided to stop using the coffee machine, for example.
What was it being used for, Amanda? Can I ask you?
Recruitment.
Oh, okay.
And we had a weekly booking for half a day, so it was really good regular income. And they were very easy to work with as an organisation. So that's dried up. Dinky Storage Park is the other one. So at the moment, we've put forward a proposal of £185. That does need to really be decided tonight because we will start the dinghy letting exercise almost from tomorrow. It's live to go. So whereas in the past we would have waited to the 1st of January, because I'm concerned about cash flow, I want us to start this straight away. And as soon as we let to those that have got an existing space, they'll be invited to pay. So I definitely need a position on that. Otherwise we can't go ahead and do that. Mudland moorings, I've suggested a figure there. That's really it. I mean, there's not a huge amount of suggestions. We've turned the floodlights off. That was one of the suggestions that Assets made. So we're not floodlighting the mugger at all at the moment as a way of trying to save money. So
on the energy costs for the college playing fields, £5, does that really reflect the cost price rise? Essentially, the space itself doesn't actually cost us anything, so it's pure bucks if someone rents it, but the electricity does, and therefore I think in a way that you ought to be considering a higher fee on the floodlights.
well, we're not turning them on, so they're off.
No, but when they're renting it.
We've never actually had that as an option.
Okay.
I mean, we could reintroduce it, and if we get approached, we could say, well, we'll turn it on for you, but you will have to pay, which might be quite a good idea.
Well, it's a £5.
It's down the bottom, it says there.
Yeah, but I've never had anyone ask me. So we could put it in, and if someone asks, so usually when people ask, we turn the lights on anyway. you know, that, you know, it's a community service, so we've not ever really charged for it. When would request for them?
It's in what Trevor said.
Yeah, I know, it's in there.
It's in there.
Yeah.
If they never use it, it's not going to make any difference, but you could change it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
so
in
we'll look
there.
at that one.
The other one actually is tennis. So we don't charge for tennis courts. There is some tech that we would have to invest in, but we could do that and then start charging for tennis. And I think you pay something like £15 to become a member to use the tech. And we then get a proportion of some of the booking fees. So we don't manage it, it gets managed by a third party, and then we get some income returned to us. I don't know how much the initial setup is, so we could look at that and try and do that during the year.
Is that something you could put in your agenda?
Yeah.
Okay, so, sorry.
Can I just ask a silly question, because obviously I haven't been here for years. Have we tried to like sell these things in our corporate?
Yeah, so we do an advert for this building every cycle. And it is surprising actually, the number of people that live here that still don't know that this room's here. We have tried to move away a bit from children's parties, which has been a bit of the bread and butter, because actually we've invested a lot of money in getting it decorated and up to scratch. We do still do them, but we try to not encourage it. We hire out the field during the summer. You know, we try to advertise as much as we possibly can.
We were thinking, weren't we, at one time, we talked about it, Amanda, about staging it a bit better.
Yeah.
Maybe we should think about that.
Yeah, we could certainly try that. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, because we haven't ever got round to it, and it would be worth doing that.
Yeah, because if you look at venues, they always sort of.
Yeah. We have got somebody that has agreed to do everyone's portraits plus team photos. So actually, at the same time that they're doing those, we could actually set up as a meeting and do. Yeah, which would be good.
Yeah.
So, I know that we need to vote. What I don't know is what we need to vote on.
We need to, well, so the question
is, can we have some sort of proposal?
So the proposal I'd put to you is, are you happy to accept the fees and charges that have been put forward? If yes, then let's put it to the vote. If not, and you want a suggested change, so it'd be more likely, if you don't like what's in there, that we change it. If it's an addition, fine, we can just add that.
Is that everything that's in blue that you've put?
Yeah.
Right, so you want us to agree to everything that you've written in blue?
The changes.
So that's the proposal. Can I have, that's all right. So someone's proposed, please.
I'll propose.
Tony's proposing, Trevor's seconding. Everyone in favour?
Well, I'm not sure now, if it's on there, it didn't say about Diggy Park, and I was going to agree to everything that was there. Is that included the Diggy Park, or you that separate?
I think the Diggy Park's included,
So that's why I didn't vote.
Understood. So we abstain because of this interest. Done. Thank you very much. The accounts and financial reports, we have none. Which takes us on to exempt business. So we need someone to propose that we go into exempt business.
I'll second.
Ian's proposed, Sheila's seconded. So you guys exempt yourselves.
Thank you.
And we can put it in.